Hello everyone, welcome to John Redmann, Power of Attorney, the show that aims to empower you through knowledge of the law. I'm attorney John Redmann.
And hello everyone, I'm Shauna Sanford. Welcome to the show. Last week we had a dynamic conversation with Loyola Law College Dean Maria Lopez about gender and equality issues within the legal profession. While women are entering law school and graduating at high rates, they're failing to reach higher levels within the profession. But why? Last week, we scratched the surface. Today, Dean Lopez joins us again to dig deeper into the problems and solutions. She'll share with us the biases, the stereotypes, and challenges along her journey to success.
Specifically, we'll get into what's being done to promote more diversity within the legal and corporate world so that they more accurately reflect the overall population. Some strides have been made. There's still a great need for more improvement.
And I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation with Dean Lopez. But before we get to Dean Lopez, you're a big advocate for equality for everyone. But why is it, in your opinion, does it appear that the legal profession is really lagging behind when it comes to equality for women and minorities rather than really paving the way?
Well, you know, we saw a slide last week about how early on in high school, the minorities and, well, women too, they start out about even, but when you get to the end of high school, when you get into higher education and postgraduate education, you see a big difference. When you get into law school, you see a vast difference. So very few minorities, relatively speaking, are getting into law school. Mm-hmm. That's where the disparities really begin. The minorities and the women who get through law school, they are already at a big disadvantage. Dean Lopez is going to talk with us more today about why she thinks it is. I think that they just start out with a big disadvantage. People have their biases. Luckily for us, we have wonderful role models like Sotomayor on the U.S. Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Dean Lopez is a wonderful role model, not only for women, but for minorities. We're delighted to have her back on the show. Look forward to that discussion.
That's right, and it's going to start in just a moment. Coming up next, Loyola Law School Dean Maria Lopez joins us, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello everyone, welcome back. We're so happy to welcome Dean Maria Pabon Lopez back to Power of Attorney. We're continuing our conversation from last week about women and diversity in the world of law. It's been reported that the glass ceiling that pervaded the law profession in 1988, and I did say 1988, is still present in 2013.
Not only is Dean Maria Lopez the first woman of Latino heritage to head up a law school in Louisiana, but she is an expert on immigration law, an accomplished writer, and has received some of the highest honors for excellence in the legal profession and education. We're thrilled to welcome her back to the show. Dean Lopez, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to continuing the discussion. I mean, there's so much ground to cover, and of course, we just have a little bit of time, so let's plunge right in. But first, we want to hear more about you. I mean, you're a role model. You are a dean of a very prestigious law school right here in Louisiana, Loyola University, my alma mater, if I might throw that in. Tell us, what started you on this path? I mean, you're an exceptional person. Tell us what got you to where you are today.
Thank you. I actually was supposed to have attended medical school.
Really?
My mother really wanted me to go to medical school, and I had done all the science requirements. But I said, let me do 1 year as a teacher, science teacher, to see how it is to be out there before going back to more education. During that year, I met the teachers union lawyer, and she was this woman who knew so much, and I would just go and ask her questions. I had never met a lawyer before in my life. I was the first lawyer in my family, but I remember thinking, this is what I like to do. She would pull a book and read whatever answer, or share with me whatever question I had. She would share an answer or a way to approach how to think this issue, and I said, that's exactly what I want to do. So of course I called my mother and says, I got news, I'm not going to medical school, I'm going to law school. And
how did your mother take that news?
She was very happy for me because she knew I had found something I really cared about,
yeah.
And so far so good.
Yeah.
I've been loving it ever since.
And talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced.
Well, I mean, it's when you're the first one of your kind that many people meet doing what you do, they're quite surprised. I've been asked, Dean of the what? And I said, well, of the law school, of the whole law school, because it's then this idea that maybe was the dean of one particular area of another. So I always take it with good humor and the opportunity to educate a little bit about who it is, what it is that I do, and who it is that I am. Particularly also Latinos, talking about issues pertaining to Latinos in the United States and in the legal profession. I, of course, grew up in Puerto Rico, where everyone is Puerto Rican, and then to get here and have opportunities to explain and maybe challenge some misconceptions about Puerto Ricans. But it's been a great run. I feel very blessed to be here.
I love the way you look at it. Opportunities to explain. Do you ever get frustrated with the fact that you still have to have these opportunities to explain?
I don't, because I felt so welcome. Because if someone had told me that as a girl growing up in the island of Puerto Rico, I'd be here in Louisiana in charge of a law school, I would say, you're kidding. So I just always know that I'm so fortunate to be here doing what I do and having an opportunity to share my experiences and my ideas and learning from others too. We can all learn from each other, and that's how I've gone at it. Education.
Just anecdotally, you mentioned to me in one of our conversations before the show that you've had the experience where you could be in the courtroom sitting with another client, maybe a Hispanic client, and the judge might not automatically assume you're a lawyer. Why don't you give us an example of what would happen and how you'd respond to that?
Sure. I worked at Legal Aid of Central Texas, and my clients were all Latina women, like I were, most of them. And we'd be sitting there, and I'd be at counsel table. There would just be two people. Typically, it's the attorney and the client. And the judge would come out, and where's the lawyer? I'm here, Your Honor. So they didn't know who I was, and I guess seeing two Latina women together didn't occur that one of them was actually the lawyer. But I think as we get out and we open up sort of lines of communications, oftentimes when students will talk to me and the judge said, and then they will say, and what did he say? I said, well, it could be he or she. The judge could be a she,
Right.
and trying to open up that we always be aware and to have good cultural competency to practice law and to do business in this society. We really have to be open to all the possibilities of the different backgrounds, ethnicities, genders of the folks you encounter.
Is it possible to point to some of the biggest struggles that women may face, once they do go to law school and then once they do graduate, and you have conversations and perhaps mentor some young graduates? If you could talk a little bit about some of the biggest hurdles that you try to warn them about.
Well, sure. There's a whole book about it. It's called Presumed Incompetent, and it's about women leaders in academia and women professors. And the idea is because there haven't been very many people of your kind doing what you do, there's a presumption that perhaps you're not as competent as the others. And there's been studies, blind studies of what teachers do without showing the ethnicity, and there is some finding of bias based on the ethnicity of the instructor. So I warned, and I'm very open about it. I think we just have to always keep learning from each other. So as a Latina woman who graduates from law school, there may be some barriers coming your way, but we will work on these tools to get you ready.
We mentioned previously that among your many accomplishments, you've written a lot on these topics that we're discussing, and we want to put up a slate. We want to make available to anybody who's interested. You've written a paper called Women Leaders in Areas of Higher Education. It's on your screen. People who are interested can download this paper at the website on the page on the screen there, www.ssrn.com. We'll also make this available on the show website. Tell us what was your. Can you summarize what you told us or what your research was that you wrote about in that paper?
Sure. I was updating research that I'd done before about women in the legal profession, and then started thinking, because of, again, being an academic and also caring very much about the business world, how are women doing in the legal profession, then in academia, and then in corporate boards? And the findings are still similar to what we've been talking about, that women, even though they're 50% law students, they do not comprise 50% of any of these. They're not 50% law professors or law deans. They are in corporate boards. They're very, very few. And in fact, there's an SEC ruling, that regulation that does discuss diversity in corporate boards. But in most other places, it's just all voluntary, right?
So, Dean, is it that women are not pursuing those paths, or is it that the barriers are just so great?
I think it's a little bit of both, where you have that women have to write the right resumes. For example, for corporate boards, you have to have some certain experiences, and so they need those opportunities to have the right resume. And then for some, once you make it, the obstacles are so hard that do you persist? In academia in particular, and in the law firms, minority women, which would be the intersection of both race and gender, those are the ones that don't persist in any good numbers.
They don't.
That's where the highest barriers are.
Okay, all right. So let's talk a little bit. I don't know that we really got into it a great deal about the 15-50-15 rule.
Sure, I'll talk to you about that. This has been identified. There's other women analyzing, other law professors, the status of women in the legal profession. And what the analysis has shown, that it's been over 15 years that women have been 50% of the law school population, but they only comprise about 15, now it's almost 20% of law school partners, of law firm partners. So 15, 50, 15 tells us that, yes, it's been over 15 years that women have comprised 50% of law students, but they still don't comprise barely above the 15% of partners and firms, and we see it in others like the judiciary and the like. And time keeps passing, and we want that number to continue to get to 50%.
Right, right. But it's going to take more than time, right? People are going to have to take action in order to make these changes come about.
Concerted effort on behalf of working with bar associations, working with different corporations that might do some voluntary plans, also creating pipelines for the minorities in particular to make it to post-graduation. All those would be ways to be very proactive and get involved.
Yeah, and we're not trying to paint a gloomy picture here, but a realistic picture about what women can expect to face if they do decide to get into the legal profession. And I know that for a lot of women, regardless of what profession it is, there's always the issue of work-life balance, which is also an issue for men, John, sure, I know as well. But when it comes to work-life balance within the legal profession, what are the challenges for women?
Well, as part of a study that I had done in Indiana some years back, one of the young woman respondents who's a lawyer, she had said, when I came back from my maternity leave, the way I was treated in my firm, I felt like saying I had a baby, not a lobotomy, because she said the treatment that she had, even though she went back to the exact same job, the perception is once you become a mother, maybe you're not as wedded to your legal career. And so those perceptions are things that are necessary to overcome.
Yeah, and for men, John, it's an issue as well, the whole work-life balance issue.
Absolutely, and for me, it just comes down to just, evaluate your employees, your associates, and your partners by the quality of the work that they do, and it's unfair for that lady, that example you gave, if she is blessed to have a child. If she wants to have a child, she has a child. She's ready to come back to work. Let her come back to work and give her her same work assignments. And if she does excellent quality work, then let her continue to progress and be promoted just like anybody else. I don't see why gender should come into it. Or if she's a minority, it should have nothing to do with any part of the evaluation. And I don't know, but apparently what you're saying is, from the research, people treat her differently.
Absolutely, and so those are challenges to be overcome, but you're right that in work-life balance, there's a whole area of research in the legal profession, the legal academy, and some of the folks who are writing are young men professors. So I think that's a big glimmer of light to think about, this is an issue that affects everyone. It's not just about women in the profession, because those women are married to men, many of them their own law school classmates. So for example, if those men join the women to say, we would like more daycares in our workplaces, right? We would like more opportunities for equal sharing. I think it will go a long ways towards making our legal profession more balanced.
Okay, all right, well, we have to take our first break, so stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to get to your questions for our guests. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Hello and welcome back to the show. Time now to get to your questions for our guest, Dean Lopez. And Dean, we are going to start with Valerie. And her question is, have women in the United States always been allowed to practice law?
The answer is no. Women were not allowed to practice law. It was obviously state by state, but women were required, or any lawyer was required, to be able to be a voter, in most jurisdictions. And of course, women weren't allowed to vote till after the war, right? So World War I. So there was even a lawsuit, Bradville versus the United States, Myra Bradville versus Illinois, actually, suing the state of Illinois to be admitted to practice law. Now, of course, yes, in all the states, women can practice law. Other countries, no. In Saudi Arabia, for example, women can't practice law.
Wow.
So we are ahead there.
Okay. Our next question comes to us from Tina, who says, why do you think minority participation in the law lags behind other professions?
Well, again, it depends on the professions, but here in the law, what we have is that there's been that expectation that the law is a jealous mistress, right? And it was very much of to begin as a male-dominated profession, in contrast to, for example, nursing, where it's mostly women, and where what you have is the minority are men becoming nurses. So that's as far as the gender, right? And then as far as the ethnicity, I think it ties to what I discussed earlier, the presumptions of competency of the different ethnic groups and the need for better awareness of the different employers, legal employers, to acquire more cultural competency so that you can treat your employees with as much even-handedness as you can.
Yeah, but you know that's a tough one, because how do you deal with that? You know, I mean, you study hard, you work hard, you know, you put in the time, and you know your stuff. So what do you say to women, and particularly minority women, in terms of dealing with this in an effective way? Because it is something that they will have to deal with.
Absolutely. I'll tell you some of the path, how you go about it, because the practice of law is pretty broad, and the statistics show that, for example, minority women end up doing more government, right? Where you start in the government, either state or federal, where there's more opportunities for women and minorities rather than the private practice, and then you can lateral. Or, for example, one area where it's still not very diverse is in the judicial clerkships.
Yeah.
We were discussing that where, for example, at the Supreme Court level, the number of judicial law clerks who are women or minorities is still very low.
Well, I want to jump into the discussion. One piece of advice that I've given, and I teach at Loyola the skills course every year, one or two different skills courses, and I've taught seminars to lawyers on a regular basis. If you're out there looking for a job and you're a minority, or maybe you're a woman and you're just not getting the opportunities maybe you ought to get, hopefully you know your stuff. You work hard, you do good work, you put out your own shingle, you get your own job, you can make your own opportunity. It's hard to run your own business, but if you're good and hopefully you have people skills, you can survive if you have to, especially if nobody else is offering you a job and a regular paycheck. Hopefully you don't have kids and tuition. You got to have a regular paycheck, because when you're on your own, you got to make your own paycheck. But in the absence of no job and no paycheck, it's something. And so at a minimum, if you are working really hard and you are out there and you join all the different boards and organizations you can, and you're networking and you handle everything from traffic tickets to whatever you got to do, but you do the research, so you're doing a good job, and everybody knows they can count on you, whether you are, whatever your ethnicity, whether you're male, female, whatever you are, you can do well and you can survive. And my father used to say the cream floats to the top. So if you're good, you are going to distinguish yourself, and people are going to call you up, and let them call you in the middle of the night, and you get out of bed and you put on your business attire and you go help them and you go meet them if they're injured in the middle of the night or whatever it is, and you'll do okay. But that's how you survive, and that's how you overcome some of those challenges, I would respectfully suggest.
I agree completely, and I will have to tell you, nowadays with social media, so many of the recent graduates who don't find a placement, then they start their own little firm. They go on Facebook, and of course they reach out to me as the dean of the law school. Dean Lopez, did you know I opened it? Oh, great! Congratulations on your firm. And so we have women and minorities doing that, right? And that gives them a little bit more flexibility to structure.
And
how
even
they
band together with one or two others who are in the same boat as you, and your strengths and your weaknesses, you complement each other, and you figure out ways to really join together and survive together.
Absolutely.
What about nonprofit organizations?
Nonprofits are also places, for example, the Legal Aid, Louisiana Legal Services, places like that, where it's been traditionally a place of opportunity. Absolutely. A lot of it might come through when they leave law school at a place like Loyola. If they do the clinic representing the poor, then they have some skills, and then they can transition pretty successfully into
It's a
nonprofit.
wonderful place to get training.
Or private practice too.
And mentoring too, of course.
Okay, all right. Our next question comes from Karen. She says, which minority groups are best represented in the legal profession, in leadership roles within the legal profession?
Well, that would be pretty local because, for example, here in Louisiana, we have very good African American representation. We have Kim Boyle, who president of the state bar and African American woman. So obviously a big leadership role. Whereas in other places like Texas, California, you might have more Latinos. But for example, at the national level, the American Bar Association has had an African American president or two, and most recently Latino president. The same with the Association of Law Schools. So I would say it varies very regionally, but nationwide, I would say where we're still pretty lagging behind maybe in Native Americans. In other areas, the Asian Americans are well represented as well.
Oh, I've got a question just about in terms of the areas where women practice, specifically litigation. Is that an area that women gravitate toward or tend to stay away from?
Well, for example, family law litigation is one area where there's quite a bit of women. I used to be a prosecutor myself, and of course in that area, criminal. Back in the day, there didn't used to be women, and now there are quite a few. Transactional is another. I mean, I think it's much more maybe their personalities. What do they like to do than necessarily the gender. But what is important is that they have the opportunity to do as much as possible.
As much as possible, whatever
That's
they'd like
what the
to.
legal profession needs to do.
Okay, and our next question comes from Lakeisha. She says, are there courses available to help someone in the legal profession prepare for racism in the real world, in law school or in continuing education?
That's a great question. I've taught a course, I taught it actually for the undergraduates at Loyola called Diversity in the Law. And we did discuss issues pertaining to the different groups in the United States and how the law treats or addresses them. So that's something that, if you find a course like that, there are courses in law school called Race in the Law as well. We have one being taught at Loyola at present. And even in continuing legal education, I've taught a course on cultural diversity. Maybe Mr. Redmann and I could teach it again, where we just open up and address how the law has dealt with issues of different background. As an example, in an ethics case, the Supreme Court of Indiana, where I'm most familiar, I came from there, disciplined a lawyer for repeatedly referring to the client of the opposing party as undocumented and illegal, and sort of putting them down because of the ethnicity of being Hispanic.
It's not trying to intimidate, which in my opinion it happens a lot in a lot of my cases, and I think that's unethical, and it's just below the belt.
Right, and so because our system of justice has to be one where all the ethnicities are treated equally, the lawyer's actions in that case were found to be unethical. So those kinds of things. So courses per se, you would have to shop around and become familiar. But I do think there's starting to be more and more courses in women in the law. There's a nice book about women in the law, several of them.
Yeah, and over the years, in all the courses that you've taught, have you ever been, just surprised by how little the students really knew about just how the world operates, or
the history as well, right? This idea that what do you mean that women weren't allowed to vote till after the World War? And that's true, or or the origins of the Civil Rights Act. All these things. I do think that's why this is a good question by Lakeisha, because we really do need to be familiarized, everyone from top to bottom, about what is out there and what has happened before, so that the same mistakes don't get repeated.
Right, exactly. Our next question comes to us from Tasha. Do you feel preconceived notions are made not only by other lawyers and judges, but that it trickles down to even court administrators, clerks, and officers?
I would think so. I mean, if you think about the judge as the leader of his or her courtroom, the judge's preconceptions might leak out to the other staff, or they might bring their own preconceptions. But I think it's what Mr. Redmann was saying. It's the quality of your performance of that act that you do as a lawyer in the courtroom that will overcome all these preconceived notions. you know, that whatever ethnicity it is, if you're Asian American, Latino, African American, in the courtroom, everyone should be treated the same because they're doing the same thing, which is representing a client to get what the system of justice is there to deliver, right, in terms of access to justice and the like. But I have to tell you, I've been the recipient of some of these where you're the lawyer, yes, and it's fine you continue educating them. I mean, I think you always have to have a positive outlook about what you're doing because we're still very blessed to do what we do. Lawyers have such a leadership role, and that's why this topic is so important. Women and minorities do need the opportunities to become leaders in the legal profession so we can continue making the legal profession one that addresses justice in our country and really in our world. Right?
Yeah, well, and I think that is a great note to end the show on. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and just really learning a lot. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate your time. Well, that is all the time that we have for this episode. Be sure to tune in again next week for another great show, and don't forget to send us your questions and your comments.
Thanks to our guest and to all of you for watching us every week. Remember, this is an interactive show and we need your participation. Send your questions and comments through Facebook, Twitter, and email. And visit us online at johnredmannpoa.com. Have a great week and be sure to join us next time on John Redmann, Power of Attorney.